Hi, welcome back to E3 Energy and Efficiency with Emily, episode 5, wood fiber insulation. So, we invited our friend Mike Means to come back today and join us and talk a little bit about wood fiber insulation. He's written a bunch of articles for Fine Home Building and Green Building Advisors. So, tell us what you've been up to, Mike.
All right, I'll make up something.
Okay, go.
Hi, Emily. I have been busy designing. I have a couple of new houses I'm working on and a few renovations I'm working on for design. I've got 2 renovations under construction. I just, last weekend, I presented at a Sierra Club conference. I presented about embodied carbon, which is maybe something we'll talk about in the future. It's an important topic and ties in with everything we do.
Absolutely.
And yeah, just running around like crazy these days.
Aren't we all, though?
Yes. Yes.
Spring's finally arrived. The sun
Yes.
was shining today, and it's like everybody's like, okay, go.
Yes. Well, yeah, no, and I forgot. We got our tree order in and got a bunch of trees planted too. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So that's.
Things are finally growing in my yard. So I have, since we moved in December, it's like, oh, I don't know what any of that's going to be. And so things are finally growing, so you can go out and walk around and say, okay, what is that?
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk a little bit about wood fiber insulation. So, this is something that we've kind of been batting around for a while recently. It seems like it's going to be a big thing here in Maine. So I know you wanted to touch on it and you have some maybe more information to share. So
yeah. So most people don't know what wood fiber insulation is. It's related to cellulose insulation. A lot of us green builder types love cellulose because it has low embodied carbon. It's relatively natural. It's using a waste product. Unfortunately it's not a growth industry. The newspaper world is not growing, and the contamination is an issue, and so it's harder to find good quality cellulose. And cellulose doesn't do you much good when it comes to exterior insulation. So cellulose is good if you're building a double stud wall, but not everybody likes double stud walls. A lot of people like continuous exterior insulation.
Sure.
And so the options for continuous exterior insulation traditionally have been foam, either XPS, EPS, or polyiso. Usually, polyiso is usually the best balance of performance and environmental damage. Rock wool, most people know the name rock salt. Now it's rock wool. Mineral wool makes a semi-rigid insulation that's good for the exterior, but it's on the expensive side, and the embodied energy is actually relatively high. It's pretty much fireproof and insect proof, so that's good, but it's not a low embodied energy or low embodied carbon material. And so in Europe for 20 years now, they've been using this product called low density fiberboard is the technical name. You might know medium density fiberboard, or MDF, or high density or tempered masonite. Those are all different fiberboards.
Yep.
Low density fiberboard is wood fiber insulation, and it can be used. It can be made into rigid panels that are, used on the outside of a building, either walls or roof. It can be made into bats, and it can be made as loose fibers. So it sort of covers all the standard insulation locations, except it's not really meant for below grade. But we have other solutions below grade.
Yeah.
Let's see. So supply. The composition is probably the simplest. Well, a mineral wool might be the simplest insulation. They just take the salt and melt it and add some mineral wool and some formaldehyde, and there you go. You have rock wool. Wood fiber, they take wood pulp, or they take wood chips, turn it into pulp, which basically means steam it, get the natural lignins out, which are the natural glues in there, and they mix it with various, relatively low impact adhesives. For the rigid board, it's often PMDI, which is basically polyurethane. They use a little bit of that to augment the natural lignins as a glue. then they usually add, they don't always, but depending on the situation, they often add varying degrees of wax, just plain old paraffin wax, which is a highly refined petroleum product, but it adds a lot of waterproofing abilities, and so you end up with an insulation material that's very low toxicity, very low embodied carbon, vapor open, and a pretty decent insulator. It's about R4 per inch, so it's comparable to EPS or aged XPS. Everybody thinks XPS, extruded polystyrene, is R5 per inch. It is the day you get it. You wait 5 years and it's R4.2 per inch. So basically, it's comparable to those other alternative insulations.
And it doesn't have formaldehyde in it, right?
No added formaldehyde. Most natural materials have formaldehyde naturally, so there is the natural formaldehyde in there, but it's not any more than you would get from a piece of paper or anything else like that.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't use a urea formaldehyde adhesive. They use PMDI, which I've been trying to memorize the name, but it's a bunch of chemicals, but it's what's in polyurethane, so it's it's isocyanate based, so it's maybe not the healthiest thing in the world. You wouldn't necessarily want to eat it, but it doesn't off gas the way formaldehyde does. That's the big problem with formaldehyde, is it off gases.
Yeah. And so the wax itself is vapor open from the inside?
Well, the wax just adds waterproofness. It's sort of the wax, the way I understand it, the wax sort of coats the individual fibers, but the overall matrix is still open to air. So it's maybe think of it as about it. It's a lot like the process is also a lot like making OSB is not dissimilar either. That's wood chips in the same, usually good quality OSB has mostly the same PMDI adhesive. Sometimes they'll add some urine formaldehyde or others, but so it's pretty comparable in composition to those. It's pretty comparable to paper. I mean, it's just, in fact, it has fewer chemicals included than paper does.
Than paper does, yeah. So yeah. Fascinating. And so that wax then is throughout the whole board itself, or the bat, or whatever is being made. It's not just like on the surface where you might see a traditional like Tyvek or Grace or
right. Or yeah, no, they add it at the beginning of the process, so it's fully embedded. I should have said there's actually sort of two classes of materials. The ones that I'm primarily talking about, they're made using what's called the dry process. So they're kind of fluffy. They can make them in different densities. The edges are often tongue and grooved. So you install them with the tongues up, and so they actually shed water and they lock together well enough to stop most air and water movement. I mean, they'll stop regular water movement. They can't stop all windblown rain. They're basically, depending on the type you get, because you can get it with different levels of included wax. Depending on the type you get, it's actually, you don't need a separate WRB. It's waterproof enough that it's a WRB. It can remain exposed for 3 months or something like that. Okay. So it's pretty tough stuff. I mean, there's another type made using a somewhat older technology called the wet process that's a little more similar to paper making. The only company I know of in North America making it is in Canada, called MSL. They make a product called Sono Climate Eco 4. Performance Building Supply in Portland is distributing it on special order right now, but if they get enough demand, they'll increase it. So essentially, that's a denser product. It does not have the same included wax, but they add a coating, and it's a pretty environmentally responsible process. FSC certified wood and all that, and that's about R2.7 per inch. So it's a little lower than the R4 of the fluffier stuff. Right. But the structural, this product has structural characteristics pretty comparable to OSB. So unless you're like in a really high wind zone, you could use it as your only sheathing without any other method of lateral support. So you have basically insulating sheathing. Literally, it's not like some separate product. You put up the sheathing and you have R in a half inch. You'd have maybe R1.5. Sheathing, which is that's pretty decent. but the more popular types right now, they're made. There are two companies in the U.S. importing from Europe. One is 475 in Brooklyn. They're importing Gutex from Germany. And that's they have a good online presence and great support. Another company called Steico, Steico, is imported by Global Wholesale Supply, and they're actually a bigger company in Europe, but they're a little more under the radar here, and that's more of like a pricing by the order, by the container situation. But a lot of bigger companies like Benson Wood are using Steico, and it's a pretty comparable product to Gutex. There's one more company, Agapan, was distributing in North America through Small Planet Supply. And that's another comparable product or product line. Each of these companies have multiple products, of course. Small Planet Supply is no longer importing it, but they have a stash that they'd love to get rid of. So they said they'll offer special pricing if somebody wants it. It's stored right now at their Vancouver office, but they also have a Portland, Oregon office. And that's in 2-inch thickness. So if you're on the West Coast especially, it might make sense to go to them. If you're on the East Coast, Steico or Gutex are a good bet. Sure. And at least I don't know about Agapan, but in talking to the reps from both 475 and Global Wholesale, so the reps representing Gutex and Steico, the products in Europe, they're carbon negative. Basically, the more you use, the better you are for the environment. They're harvesting all within 80 miles of the factories. They're all FSC certified forests. So it's kind of magic. I mean, and depending on the situation, when you even shipping it here, if you're shipping it here by the container and using it, relatively close to Brooklyn or Maryland, where these two places are based, and not using an exorbitant thicknesses, it can still be carbon negative even here, according to Loris from 475.
Okay.
So
it's always good to know, yeah, because you think about it and you're like, oh, they make all these fantastic products in Europe, and we historically haven't, they've been doing this for 20 years, but it's still not here, in the United States. And so it's you think about the fact that it is this fantastic product, but how do you get it here, and then how much impact does that have in order to actually get it here, So. Yeah. And then where does it go once it gets here? And so, like you said, if it's coming to the East Coast, then you want to use it on the East Coast, but So. Right,
and it's both companies are stocking it in 2 3/8 thickness, which is 60 millimeter. So you get something like R9 out of a panel, R8 to R9 out of a panel. Sure. You can stack up multiple panels if you want more, but that in most places south of us, that's enough to provide good dew point control in a standard, in a relatively conventional wall assembly. And if you want better, if you're farther north, then you just add multiple layers, or you special order it by the container and get thicker product. And if you order by the container, at least at 475, they say if you order by the container, basically the discount is you get it's like getting an extra inch of insulation for free.
That's so. You gotta get a whole container's worth, and so you need.
You have a container, but an inch of it's free. So And the really so it's a great product. It has 8 to 10% of the market in Europe. It's not like everybody in Europe is using it, but it's a pretty versatile product. And the really exciting thing for me, at least, and for you too, I think, is the first company in North America setting up to manufacture product using the dry process is based here in Maine. Go Lab, which is an offshoot of Geologic in Belfast. It's a partnership of Josh Henry as a PhD chemist and Matt O'Malley, who runs Geologic's design wing. They partnered up and have Matthew McConnell as the marketing person, and they're going to make it right here in Maine. They just won under contract on a closed down paper mill in Madison, Maine, and they're actually getting equipment from Europe. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They're just going to take an established system and implement it. And they're planning at the moment. They're planning to hit the ground with product about this time next year.
Which is fantastic. I mean, for us,
Amazing.
that's great. It's like an hour from here. So I
Yeah,
definitely, I think you could get into the carbon neutral, carbon negative for sure,
yeah.
which is fantastic, and using it kind of everywhere. But I've also been talking to a lot of our builders and other people in the industry. Even just here in Maine, I think they're going to have a pretty good, people who smaller builders who would have used it, who've got the Gutex or have gotten Psycho or whatever. But if you don't have to buy a whole container full of it, it's going to be more cost effective for you to use it. And so when you're the small guy, when you're building, one house at a time, a container of it is, if you don't have anywhere to store it, what are you going to do with it? And so um, I think it's going to hit a market here that's, even more fascinating because, you can hit smaller targets, people who are really doing great stuff and who are trying to get away from, that. I know Geologic is kind of pro no foam, no plastics, and all of their stuff. So the fact that then they took that and figured out a way to get it here for this market for other people. And I'm sure that they'll try to use it in some of their prefabricated and panelized construction, which, as you know, that we're huge on panelized construction and how
Yeah.
that works. And so I think that's kind of the future. And so them being able to use it, and even, Benson Wood, who imports a bunch of Psycho, certainly Maine is a lot closer to New Hampshire than Europe. So I
Yeah.
think, they use it on all of their Unity homes. Not sure
Mhm.
if they use it on their Benson Wood. I'm sure some of their Benson Wood projects use it. And so Tectonics, which was the house that we just built in Lovell, was the first one to roll off their Tectonics line, and we of course had it on that, and that was our first experience with using the wood fiber exterior insulation. And so it definitely came with its interesting challenges, the strapping and not being able to attach siding directly to it, which was great, but then having to kind of infill because of course we have a super windy site, and so we needed to really make sure that the siding was going to stay on the house. And so then having it kind of in the infill, and all of the framing is at 24 inches on center, so now you have strapping in between framing, and how does that all kind of connect together. So it's been kind of a fun building science-y learning experience for us because I always like to learn something new and fun and cool. So we're pretty excited about that, and really just getting away from foams in general. You got to use them when you got to use them, and sometimes that's the right answer. But this product, it certainly. And I didn't know you could make it into a bat. I guess I sort of missed that part.
Yeah, yeah. No, actually, both Styco and Gutex also make bats and loose blown. There's just not enough. There's hardly a market for rigid board, and so they're sort of trying to introduce things to the market as the market will accept them. But GoLab is planning to come right out with the bat. There's slightly different chemistry, a little more chemicals in there, but there's I think it's a polyester binder instead of polyurethane to give it a little more springiness, I would imagine. Obviously, you don't need the wax because you don't need it to be waterproof.
Right.
But it'll be good to have another alternative when you can't do blown in. I mean, there are situations where bats just make sense, and so as an alternative to fiberglass or mineral wool, it'll be nice to have something. And then the loose blown, I'm pretty excited about because cellulose is a declining market, and the loose blown wood fiber it's less processed. Like it doesn't like the way they calculate the embodied carbon or embodied energy of cellulose insulation is a little wonky because they don't really count the fact that they had to make paper in the first place. They sort of start with, okay, we have this paper that magically appeared.
You've done this thing with this paper, and it's like, okay, but how did you make the paper first?
Yeah.
And you're right. That was one of the things that cellulose is kind of this going away market. People aren't doing newspapers. That's not this thing that like happens anymore. And so then we've been hearing from our installers is they've been getting cellulose that's laced with plastics and all kinds of other things, which then just, makes your machine a problem, and it gunks up everything. And
Mhm.
I know when we toured the Benson Wood factory, they were also, struggling because they have this huge machine that dense packs, and they want a bale of cellulose, which apparently is not a thing here. You can't get a bale of cellulose. And so they had to, cut the plastic off of all of the smaller sizes, which, work great for somebody who has like a hopper in the back of the truck and it's blowing them in. But, being able to get a bale of this wood fiber insulation that they can just kind of put in their machine is kind of it's like, oh, well, yeah, well, we can reduce all this plastic waste by, having somebody that has to stand here and cut all the plastic off of every single one of these things, so, like fill up what would be a bale. So,
Yes. Oh, no, exactly. No, and it's, yeah, no, it's loose blown has GoLab is planning a borate additive for their loose blown,
Yep.
Which is comparable to cellulose.
Yep.
And yeah, no, and there is some. You've probably heard about cardboard cellulose. So that there's a couple of companies in the U.S. trying to manufacture, who are manufacturing or working on manufacturing cardboard-based cellulose. But from what I understand, they're having and thanks to Amazon and modern lifestyle, cardboard is a growth industry.
Yes.
But, yeah, but it's a lower quality fiber, and there's a lot of, there's all the tape and everything else on there. So I've heard that there are some problems with consistency, and it's a more processed material, rather than just taking the raw wood and saying, hey, we have all these trees that we can't do anything else with. We have, Maine's paper industry is completely decimated.
Yeah,
so and so
too, for us, there's, it's not just about, the fact that, like we have wood and pulp and we can, make this as a renewable resource, but that we have the infrastructure here. It's like, what do you do with a paper factory when it's no longer a paper factory? I don't know.
Right now, yeah. I guess one not downside, but a difference from Europe is in Europe they're using long managed, state managed, FSC certified forests in a very sustainable manner. From what I understand from the GoLab guides, that's just not something that we have in Maine. So they're going to be using local material, and they will try to use sustainably harvested wood, but it likely won't be FSC certified. So that's a bit of a ding. But on the other hand, the cost is going to be whereas Gutex and Styco are somewhat cost competitive with Roxel Comfort Board, the rigid Rockwell, I should say, and it's 2 to 3 times the cost of a higher end polyiso. GoLab is really trying to hit parity with polyiso, so it's going to be, and on the interior they're trying to hit parity with mineral wool bats. So it won't be the cheapest insulation, but they're trying to at least get it down so it's a reasonable alternative cost wise.
Well, and I think that in the start, that's just not something that we have. It's not something that we have access to. But if it takes off and it is something that they, start to do a lot of, and it becomes this thing in North America or whatever, maybe it's something that they can work towards. As they reforest to recreate what we're using to kind of work out the first round. Maybe they'll move towards that. But yeah, I mean, you can't really create things you don't have. So
yeah.
But
trying to think what else. Yeah, so trying to think what else there is to say about it.
Yeah, I know.
Well, yeah. So I'll make a plug for this. This is the new issue of Fine Home Building.
Yep. And
this is my column, Building Matters, and so that's the article, and that's my friend Reggie from Mineral Builders installing it on his building.
Yep.
And he's he's naturally anti-foam anyway, but he said it was way easier to install than it is to install foam. Just it was more rigid, it locked together, it doesn't compress the same. So not only does it work well, and it's much more environmentally friendly than foams, it's also easier to install than foam, at least according to Reggie and some other builders I've talked to.
Yeah, no, I had the opportunity to actually go up and see their building before they got all the siding on it. And so that was really exciting. And so and they had been talking about it, I think, before Geologic had kind of formalized their partnership, that like, wouldn't it be great if we had something like this in the Northeast that was easier to access? Because again, they're, you know, one of the smaller builders where they're not going to buy a container of it. Where are they going to put a container of it? So
Right.
I thought that that was really exciting when I got to go up and see. And they rehabbed a post office, which was also fun and exciting. You know, so they take this town building that's been there forever, and they created this other thing, and then they made it super efficient, and you know, all of that is fantastic. So,
Yeah.
and
It,
if you have a link to the Find Home Building article, I will post that in the show notes so that people can read it online too. If they haven't picked up a copy of the hard copy of the magazine, so.
yes, no, I appreciate that. I just checked and it's not online yet. This just came yesterday. But when it's out, I'll let you know. Yeah, question for you, because this is still, one reason I went from being designer to design builder is because I like getting my hands on these things that I'm speccing, but I still haven't actually used it myself.
Yeah.
I know that they all say that it's a WRB and that you can tape it or tape it with a primer. Did you guys in Level, did you tape it? Did you treat it as a WRB? Did you use a separate WRB?
We used it as a WRB, and it came partially taped, depending on how the panels kind of came together, and then they taped the rest of it. And the guys who've been building forever, because Level's in the middle of nowhere, so these guys have been doing this for a long time. They said that it sticks right to the tapes, stick right to it, and so it worked really great, fantastic. Because somebody else had sort of told us that you might have to put spray adhesive on it first and then tape to it. But all of the tapes that we got from Performance Building Supply, or that came from Benson Wood, all the Sega tapes and everything that they used to tape it up worked fantastic. So they were pretty happy with it, and we used it as a WRB, and then it was strapped, obviously, because the siding can't just stick directly to it, and so it has a rain screen, kind of built into it anyway. So.
Yes. Where, and structurally, I mentioned the structurally rated panel available at Performance Building Supply, but it's also, from what I understand from my research, is that the panels are stiff enough that if you have another means of lateral bracing, if you're using lead-in 1x4s or lead-in Simpson straps as your lateral bracing, or if you have a timber frame, I guess with infill framing, then you can span the studs with these panels. You don't even have to land the joints on the studs. They can just float because the ends are tongue and groove as well. So you can sort of install it without even having sheathing there, which is kind of a neat thought if you're really into vapor open and really into not using plywood or anything like that.
Yeah, we actually have our structural layers on the inside, so it's just kind of over the outside, and then we have dense packed insulation in the stud cavity, and then we have our sheathing and taped layer kind of in the interior air barrier layer before we have our service cavity then on the inside of that. So we do have sheathing, which is acting as our structural layer, but it's not directly behind the Styco. So.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, so kind of an interesting, cool thing. I think we'll have to get Tim on here, and we'll have to get Ted Benson on here, and a couple of these panelized guys to come on and kind of talk about the different ways they all build their panel systems, because it's fascinating. I know with Ted, they build their structural core in the center, so then your wall thickness can be kind of whatever you want it to be to meet your performance requirements, which is kind of a new way of thinking about it from the design. Is like everything from here on the inside of the shell is flexible, and everything from here out is is mine, and I can do whatever I want with it as the architect and the energy consultant. And it's you want to hit this target, then my wall is 9 inches thick, or it's 12 inches thick, or it's 15 inches thick, kind of depending. And so that's kind of this fun new way of thinking about it. And I know Matt Bowers, you saw the video that he had posted walking around, and I don't even know how thick his cavity was. It looked like it was 8 inches thick in that thing. So kind of fascinating to see how a bunch of these people put their wall systems together. So we should do a whole podcast on panelized or wall system construction. So
yes.
different ways to do double stud walls, right? Because
Yeah, I mean that's on my list for my building science and beer discussion group. We want to discuss the finer points of the different ways of doing double stud walls. I mean, it's not like everything under the sun, but there's a range of ways you can do double stud walls, and they're
sure,
all
yeah, staggered stud, not staggered stud. How do you do your
yeah,
insulation?
right.
Do you make cavity bays? Do you do a whole section? There's even within a somewhat standard construction model like double stud wall, they're 2x3s and 2x4s, and kind of really fascinating on the different ways to do it. So that would be fun. We should do that. We should get a whole bunch of people on and do like a whole discussion group on how do you build your double stud wall.
Sounds
So
good.
well, thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it. It's been
Yeah,
fun. I always like to have you on, and we'll see lots of you kind of over the course of the podcast. So I appreciate you popping in. And again, when it pops up online, I will add the link to the Fine Home Building article in the show notes. So
great. Thank you. Thanks
you're
for
welcome.
having me.
Yeah, absolutely.